Everyone. Here we are kicking off the first week of History of Christianity 1. And what I want to talk to you about to start things off is simply thinking through what is history? What do we mean by this term? And what does it mean to really engage in this kind of study? So it's always fun, I think, to dig into the history of words. Our word history comes from the Greek, from the word historia, which means learning or knowing something by investigation. And it comes from a root word, istor, which is one who knows or sees. So then we have history then being something about both gaining knowledge, but also gaining a deeper perception about things. Here concerning things in the past, the things that have shaped the present reality. And here I think it's also worth reflecting on how history is useful for developing skills towards ministry. If history is about peering more deeply into something, then it's also about gaining skills in contextual thinking. It's helping you ask the question, how did this situation arrive to this point? What is the story behind this place, this group of people, this event? And so history then is a way of thinking about practices, mindsets, habits, assumptions, decisions that have led to a certain moment in time. I think that's very useful for people who are training for ministry. I think that is helping you to refine skills for reading context that you will be able to use anywhere you go. And so the study of the past, even the very ancient past, is actually quite relevant to what you're doing. It's relevant simply as being part of a competent communicator of the Christian tradition, but it's also relevant for having a particular ministerial skill set. So with thinking about that, I thought it'd also be useful then to line out for you 5 particular characteristics of thinking historically. Now, you might note that I'm using the lecture notes. You can download the lecture notes from the course learning site Populi, and feel free to just follow along while I am laying these out here. So first, for thinking historically, is simply observing change over time. Seeing what practices, ideas, institutions remain over different periods of time and what do not. So for instance, the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire lasted. It also developed. It changed. The western half fell. The eastern half remained for almost 1,000 years later until the fall of Constantinople in the 15th century. So observing change over time is really just a fundamental aspect of being a historian. Now, alongside that is this next piece, which is to notice alongside change over time, context. Context is that way of observing how and when historical events happen, the framework for those events, the ability to see how this event unfolded over time, what made it possible for this event to happen. So, following this Roman Empire model, what allows the Roman Empire to emerge? What led to the fall of Rome in the 5th century and its collapse in the West? And then what allows the Eastern Roman Empire to survive into the 15th century? Those are questions about context. Now, if we have change over time and then context, we can then move to thinking about what we can call causality, our third characteristic. Causality is asking the question, what led to any specific historical event to occur? So, what causes the fall of the Roman Empire in the West and its survival in the East? That's getting us to the so what question. Up until now, history has just been about change over time and context. That is the who, the what, and the whens of history. Now we're starting to get to why questions with number 3. Alongside that, then, our fourth step, our fourth characteristic is contingency. The contingency of history. That is the awareness that there's actually a multitude of interconnecting things that make any one aspect of history possible. So if we begin to ask, why did the Roman Empire fall? You'll pretty quickly get to the answer, it's complicated. In fact, this is the answer most historians give to most why questions. It's complicated. That's shorthand for there's multiple contingent factors leading to any one historical event. Now, this is a really useful counterweight because sometimes we act as if any given historical event is inevitable, that there is perhaps something inevitable about the Roman Empire collapsing, or there was something inevitable about the Protestant Reformation happening, or something inevitable about the spread of Christianity. So contingency helps us keep focused on explanation and not simply accepting an event that has happened. And finally, we get to our last aspect of thinking about history, complexity. Complexity. Complexity allows us to be aware of context, causality, and contingency. And so we begin to see that there is no simple answer for any one thing. This helps us avoid nostalgia for the past, that there was a better time, a golden era when everything was perfect or easy. Complexity allows us to ask deeper questions about the past that perhaps helps us move past nostalgia, the wishing for the good old days. And the awareness of complexity helps us avoid simply offering a chronological category or a catalog of all things that have happened over time. As Winston Churchill once said, history is just one damn thing after another. No, the historian would say, no, history is a very complex reality full of contingent events. So, we have these 5 characteristics of thinking historically, and they build. Change over time, context, causality, contingency, complexity. One of the goals of this class is to help you get to those deeper levels of historical thinking. We'll start with looking at context and change, but we'll begin to ask those why questions that get us to contingency and complexity. Alongside this, there's another aspect I want to talk to you about here for thinking about how to study the history of Christianity. And it's simply to clue you in to a couple of different ways that early Christianity has been studied to help you better understand how I'm going to be approaching the study of the material here and how I'm going to be teaching you. So we could put these into 4 categories. I'm going to name them here for you, and then we'll go through them. Confessionalism, institutional history, doctrinal development, and sociological analysis. So let's go back to the top here. Confessionalism is using the past in order to make an argument for your own position, right? In particular, Protestants and Roman Catholics had competing interpretations of early Christianity in order to reinforce their own hardened positions about which tradition was the authentic expression of the church, right? The problem with confessionalism is that it leads us to read sources selectively. We choose the sources that fit our arguments. We ignore the sources that don't. This might be familiar to you from arguments on the internet. This is something we want to avoid. Now, if we're going to read the past as Anglicans or Episcopalians or a Baptist or a Methodist, that's legitimate. It's legitimate to approach the past with interests generated from your particular location in the Christian tradition. But what you want to avoid is not moving to an overly confessionalist or polemical way of reading the past. So I'm selecting sources in part because I think they're of interest to our particular expression of the Christian tradition. But I'm not ignoring others that might be inconvenient for it. Let's also think about institutional history. Institutional history is studying the history of the church, mostly limited to how it develops in terms of councils, bishops, papacy. Emphasizes the form of the church as the most important thing. So we even see this in this title, Church History, which can really limit what you study versus if you say, we're studying the history of Christianity. Church history focuses on institution more. History of Christianity asks questions that might go beyond institutions to people, movements, places. Obviously, institutional history is important. We want to know about the development of bishops. We care about what happens in councils. But we're not going to simply emphasize institutional history in this course. A third element is doctrinal development. That is focusing on the emergence of orthodoxy in early Christianity, of Christology, of Trinitarian theology, of emphasizing the Nicene Creed and the formation of the early church councils. We could also call this area of focus historical theology. Historical theology is going to be really useful for us. We need to know these things around the development of Christian belief, especially around Christ and the Trinity, if we're going to be leaders in the church. But if we only emphasize that, then we might miss some other things as well. And these other things we might find falling under my final category here, which is sociological analysis. This is also what we could call a people's history or history from below. This is the interest in the varied ways in which Christians lived and behaved and thought and worshiped, prayed. It's getting to that question of what did the average Christian think? What did they make of the development of the papacy? Or how did they respond to the Council of Nicaea? Now, often these can be really difficult questions to answer because we usually only have evidence from the early Christian era of the leaders themselves, the theologians, the councils, the bishops. But we can try to get to this question of society and belief and the ordinary average Christian through material evidence, archaeology, church remains, art. So we'll be pulling some of that in as well. So in a way, these four modern approaches, confessionalism, institutional history, doctrinal development, and sociological analysis, will be forming four different quadrants or clusters that will inform how we think about and do our work throughout this semester, and if you're with me for the spring semester course in the early modern and modern era of Christianity. I hope this helps you make sense of why we have the different kinds of readings we have as well. Now, to end this video, I would like to direct you over to the VoiceThread link for this week and have you respond to the prompt I have over there. I'll give it to you now so you can spend some time to reflect on it. Please offer your response before our group session meets. And the question is, what is history to you? What's its meaning? What does it resonate with you as a term? Have my definitions and concepts here helped you at all? All right, that's all for now. Look forward to hearing from you soon.